Okay. I welcome everybody. So tonight's session is about soulmates. Do we believe in soulmates? What are soulmates? Do you have a soulmate? Can you mess up your soulmate? And more importantly, even in the discussion of soulmates, is how do you actually make a relationship work? Because we're going to see the soulmate discussion is, in a certain sense, is esoteric. It's not necessarily going to change your world. There's no way to, put your soulmate meter on to see if your spouse is your soulmate. We'll see. Certainly, once you get under the chuppah with somebody, once God moves the reality that you get under that canopy with someone to marry, the sages tell us that is your soulmate. I'll explain how that works, what the different aspects of soulmates are. I will get to that. But more importantly is, I have done many, many, many hours of marriage counseling. And I can tell you that I have actually probably never seen, maybe one exception, never seen a case where the couple could not have made it work if they knew what they were doing. The reason why couples don't succeed is because they don't know how to interact. And if they knew how to interact, their worlds would be great. That's why I tell you, if we didn't have the secrets of relationships that was given to us through our understanding of Torah, I don't know how people could survive, which is why you have 65% divorce rate. Unhappy marriages abound. So we need to know how to interact. Today's session also, we're going to get into a little bit how to choose your soulmate. Because as I said, okay, if you end up somehow getting under the canopy together, under the chuppah together, which is a deeper sign that you are soulmates, but sometimes people don't understand how to make the process of decision making. Okay, so this is also going to be relevant to understand what you're looking for in your soulmate, and you find your soulmate, and then how do you actually interact in a way that's going to be successful, and then where do we go from there? So let us begin. So now I want to explain this based on a mystical teaching, very important fundamental teaching in the esoteric systems, about the soul of a person. And the mystics tell us there are 5 levels of the soul. Okay, there is the highest level, and then it comes down in different gradations to the lowest level of the soul. Now, the truth of the soul is one entity, not like sort of parts, because it's a spiritual entity. But there are different aspects of the soul that are in charge of different parts of a person's being. And I'm going to explain to you what those parts of the soul are. And I want to claim that the crucial thing is to make sure that when you are interacting with your spouse, your soulmate, you are interacting on all the different levels of your soul. That's what we're going to try to understand today. We'll understand when there's some incongruity and how to line that up and the way to make this successful. So let's begin. Now, of the 5 parts of your soul, the part that says the lowest part is the part that comes to rest in the body, has the most connection to the actual body, is called the nefesh. Nefesh actually means to rest. And the soul, that part of the soul, rests in the body. It's connected to what's called the life force. Life force is not the divine soul, but the life force then connects to the aspect of the divine soul called the nefesh. Now, what is the nefesh in charge of? Is in charge of your physical experience, your actions. The sages say it's connected with the aspect of the liver, the lower part that's full of blood and sort of gets the whole body working. And therefore, the nefesh, the lowest part of your soul, is connected to the physical functioning and existence of the human being, the action world. Now, how does the soulmate issue line up with the physical action world? Well, let's start with real basics here. When a couple meets, there must be a physical attraction. Now, I mean, you're going to say, well, of course, that's obvious because we come in a world that, unfortunately, that's the only thing that many people have in relationships, unfortunately. But you have to understand that even in the spiritual system, there must be a spark in the relationship. There has to be a physical connection. There has to be an attraction. That is why in Jewish law it's forbidden to get married to someone if you didn't see them. Now, of course, that's obvious, but it's not so obvious because all the things you heard about arranged marriages, which are not really correct. The Talmud said that that's never supposed to happen. What it did happen was because there were pogroms and were being killed, and people would get their children married early, so they would have kids and they would continue because they were always threatened of being destroyed as a people. So sometimes there were families that would make arranged marriages, so the young people would get married at a very, very early age, so they have kids and hopefully some would survive. That's the terrible tragedy of the history. However, the real reality is that it says in Jewish law, you cannot get married unless you see the person and you feel an attraction. And I want you to understand why this is, because you have to understand that the people who try to divide the spiritual and physical usually end up getting messed up because they try to be, oh, I'm all spiritual, I'm not in the physical. It's not true. The physical has to be an expression of the spiritual. And therefore, when there's a connection in the marriage, there has to be a physical connection too. There has to be desire. There has to be connection. There has to be attraction. If there isn't, there's no way to bridge certain things. When you have a child, so the child is from you. So that's natural. The husband and wife coming together to become one have to bridge that. And there has to be a connection on the physical level too. Now, based on that, I want to give you a really important phenomenon in marriage. What happens is that there is a fallacy in America, and you see it all the time. People, they go out someplace, they get dressed up fancy. They're home, husband and wife, they look a bunch of slobs, dressed like slobs, whatever. I don't understand. Who are you getting dressed up for? Why when you go someplace out, are you all of a sudden dressed up, but when you're in your home with your spouse, you look like a slob? And the answer is because the wrong belief in the world right now is, well, listen, let it all hang out. You married me, so what? Here's what you get. That is a very, very wrong view. The view is supposed to be, I still put my best foot forward. And I feel, and this is a very important thing in people's minds because everybody wants to be loved, no matter what. We all want that. So this is kind of a way that's dumped on a marriage, and it's wrong. People, when they date, all of a sudden they're putting their best foot forward, this and that. It's the weirdest thing. I mean, I knew people who were living together for 8 years. They got married and they got divorced 3 months later. How is that possible? Well, the answer is, unfortunately, when they were dating, they weren't as comfortable. So they figure, I put my best foot forward. Now I'm married. Too bad, you got to take me as I am. Bad mistake and untrue and unfair. Yes, there's going to be a certain amount of, I love you, and I know that, we all have challenges and we all have issues and this and that. I'm not just going to, say, well, you're not putting your best foot forward, you're out. But why would a person who loves someone else not want to put their best foot forward? And that is true on the physical dimension too. It's very important that not only does this go and begin the relationship on the physical connection, the lower part of the soul, but it is maintained. Okay, that's point one. Now, there's an interesting Hasidic story. I don't know if this is true or not, it's a very interesting story. This is the way the story goes. The story is that there was a couple in Europe that had an arranged marriage. For whatever reasons, as I said, sometimes it was done, and it happened sometimes, as I said. So what happened was they had to have the bride and groom meet before the wedding to make sure they're agreeable. So the groom walks in and the bride meets the groom, but they really wait to the last minute because everyone's at the wedding already. In Europe, they didn't have any money, so they didn't usually get married like a fancy way. They made it part of like the Friday night dinners or whatever they did. So the groom comes to meet the bride, and the bride looks at the groom, and he's a hunchback. And she says, "This wedding's off. It's off. We're not doing it." There's bedlam, is pandemonium because what do you mean? People are here, you're married. No, she's not right. She's right. She doesn't want to. So she calls up the wedding, and they don't know what to do. So they say to the groom, "Listen, I'm pretty sorry, but you know what we can do? Listen, just give me one favor. Give me 5 minutes to speak to her alone. If she says no, then fine. And if she agrees, then we'll go on." Okay, 5 minutes. So they go in there, he talks for 5 minutes, come out, say, "The wedding's back on." So what did you say? She says, I explained to her that I had a vision one time before I was even born, my soul, of who my soulmate would be. And they showed me you. And you were the most amazing bride in the world. But one problem, you were a hunchback. So the groom says, so I prayed, I said to God, listen, don't give it to her. Give the hunchback to me instead. And that's what happens. So she hears that, so, okay. Now, I don't know if that's just a great line to say. I mean, it's a great pickup line. I don't know if that's true. But what happened, she saw him in a totally different way. So although the first dimension is the physical, when you get to the higher level, yes, the physical changes. And you see that. A lot of times you meet people and you don't physically like the way they look so much. You get to know them and you see a whole new dimension in them. Why is that? Because you're coming to the higher expression called the Ruach. The Ruach is the wind, is the connector. It's the higher part of the soul now. And that is connected with the heart. And that's in charge of the emotions, personality of a human being. So there's a physical connection, but now you got to make sure you get along with the person, that there is this emotional personality connection. And very often when there is, it actually reframes the physical because it's actually higher than the physical. Okay, now I want to explain what it means on connecting this emotional level because people really misunderstand it. There is a very interesting book. It's a pretty good book. There's some serious flaws with it, but there's an interesting book called Getting the Love You Want. Getting the Love You Want. All right, it's an interesting book. It's by a therapist. But when I read it, I saw immediately there was a mistake from the very beginning. I by the way he called the book, he called it Getting the Love You Want, which means that what I'm in for is what I'm going to get. And he actually says that. He says that when people pick each other, they pick each other based on what they can get. Now, there's some truth to that. I'll tell you, this is a crazy, crazy story. One time we were doing counseling and I was living in Israel, and there's a woman who lived in the other side of the world. She had a whole very, very different background. She was from an abusive family. She fled that whole background. She came to the place. She got married. She happened to marry a guy who was abusive in the same way that her family of origin was. That's like crazy. She didn't know. How's that possible? Because subconsciously, we do choose a person that we are realizing is some kind of complement to who we are. That happens. And in this book by Harville Hendricks, Get the Love You Want, he says that's an evolutionary process. And I pick someone I'm going to get what I'm going to get. And in a codependent relationship, I'm picking someone that's going to give me the same problem that I'm stuck with. Doesn't bring that example, but that's understandable. But there's a grave mistake in that. It's not really the whole picture. When you go and you pick your soulmate, it's happening on many, many subconscious levels, and there is a sense of completion on the emotional, psychological, and spiritual level. And here I'm talking about really the emotional personality level. That's that you are picking up. But what are you looking for? Let's understand this. Let's go by the Hebrew word for love. What's the Hebrew word for love? So the Hebrew word for love is the word ahava. Now ahava is a word that means to give. Hav in Hebrew is to give. Hav. So what does love have to do with give? This is a very, very deep idea. People have the wrong concept of when you start to love somebody. They talk about a concept of falling in love. And that's very tricky terminology. You fell in love. And you fell into a pit, you fell into a hole, you fell into a ditch. Whoops, I fell into love. You know, when you fall into love that way, I just happen to fall in love, you kind of fall out of love afterwards. Because people don't understand that's not what it is. Yes, there is a euphoric feeling when you meet the person, the infatuation you feel because you feel you're being completed by the other person. But you must realize that that will fade away by definition unless you put the work into the relationship by giving. That's the way the system works. All inspiration works the same way. You get inspiration, and then it disappears. You must take the inspiration and use it. Add the perspiration to the inspiration. Do the work. So that's exactly what love is. You get this picture of, wow, this is how we would connect. And the way to now make the relationship work is to do ahava, to give to the other person. Because what happens is, as you give to the other person, listen to this, every person loves themselves. Just naturally. That's the way it is. I had a story of a guy who was on death row in the 1800s. He tried to kill himself many times. He was going out to be hung, and a stone from the ceiling moved, was about to fall, and he jumped out of the way. It's natural. People love themselves. They save themselves. So you love yourself. How do I love you? I take myself and I deposit it in you. I become you. I invest myself in you. The giving blurs the lines between the outside world. I am now expanded myself. And I've taught you many times the idea of even being a person that can love outside of themselves. People have the wrong notion. They believe you love people because now you were being selfish before, and now you gotta just give and suffer. That's not what it is. It's so much deeper. The way you start giving and loving other people is you become bigger. You see them as part of your responsibility. They're an extension of yourself. And you can love them because you're giving to them. So the way you develop love with a person, the way you develop the second level is not through getting the love you want, it's through giving the love you should. Now, of course, if there is a person and a group that are not doing this properly, or a couple where one is giving, the other one is only taking, then that's a problem. That needs counseling, because that's not normal. The normal process is, in a proper marriage, is you don't say, what are you giving me? You say, I'm giving you 100%. And the other side says, I'm giving you 100%. And once you start, tit for tat, well, I gave you, you didn't give me, then it falls apart. The idea is I need to give. Now, I want to explain this even deeper. This really is how the soulmate process works on the second level. Because when you are meeting the person that is your soulmate, whether you subconsciously picked it or you hooked into what was real. This is your person you're married, this is your spouse now. The shortcomings that you both have are fixed up through your giving to the other shortcomings. Let me say that again. Not like Harville Hendricks said in his book that you're going to fill my shortcomings. I'm going to fix up my shortcomings by giving to you what you need. The giving to the other actually fixes me up, makes me whole. You giving to me, my spouse giving to me, makes the spouse whole. I like getting it also, it helps me. But the completion of the person is through the process of giving. So for example, let's say you have a couple. Let's say the wife cooks the meals, and let's say she's a terrible cook. She burns everything. Okay, let's say the husband is an angry person. He gets angry all the time. This is a perfect match. Why? Because the wife's burning the meal is what requires the husband to act differently. His natural response is to yell and get upset and frustrated. And now he's been set up with the soulmate to complete himself by every time she burns the meal, he says, wow, what a delicious dinner you made. My favorite black meat. Wow. You know, and I have my hammer and chisel, and I want to use it on something. I'm going to use it on this. This is great. I'm so excited. When he goes and he gives to her in her shortcoming, that is perfectly tailored to be the soulmate. And that's people don't understand. When your spouse has a problem and a shortcoming, your attitude should not be, oh, wow, you know, wow, I'm so perfect, you know, why couldn't she be more perfect like me? That's what people think. And the answer is no. You have your shortcomings, and she has her shortcomings. And you both do. And now what happens is that the shortcomings that your spouse has that you subconsciously picked up are the things that you need to get out of yourself and to give to help the spouse to grow. And that's a very, very fundamental thing that people don't realize. And we must say this because the secular world has totally taken this concept and gone crazy. Men and women, the Talmud says, is an am b'fnei atzmo, a separate nation. Men and women think completely differently. And if you don't believe me, get married for a day, and you'll see it's true. Every time, how many times do you have this whole story? You know, the husband comes home and then the wife's complaining about a problem she had, and the husband gives a solution, and she says, you know, you're not listening. He's like, I am listening. Everyone has that. Do you not realize that probably every 99, there's no 100%, 99 male-female processes have the same thing? Because the Talmud says women have a quality of communication, and to speak it out has a very powerful effect. For men, it's not that much. So your wife's talking to you about a problem, and the husband wants to give a solution. If you think that that's going to change because you heard this class, you're wrong. It's always going to be like that. So what do? I'll tell you what I do sometimes. Sometimes I know if my spouse is having a very difficult time with something and they need to go and express it, I will tell myself in my head, I'll say, Carmi, listen, this could be a 20-minute here. You just bite your tongue, just stay with it. And I'm literally holding back from what I want to say because I got an approach. But it doesn't help her, helps me. The quality of male-female being completely different means that the only way that you can actually build a unity here is by true giving, because it's not the giving that you yourself want. You know? Yeah, I have a great present, honey. I'm buying you Falcons tickets, seasons tickets. Great, you're giving your own present. What are you supposed? You're supposed to be giving what the other person needs, and it's not what you need because it makes no sense to you. That's bridging the gap. That's becoming a true giver. That's true ahava. And the amazing, beautiful part about this is on the second level of the dimension of the personality, you are perfectly matched, not in your perfection, but in your imperfection. The shortcomings that each one has is an opportunity for you to be a true giver, thereby truly uniting, thereby truly fixing yourself, thereby truly making a relationship. That's level 2. Okay, beautiful. So we have the physical, the nefesh. We have the personality, emotional, where a lot of most action happens there. Now, I want to explain one thing here in terms of how dating in the secular world works. Dating in the secular world stops at these two. If you got to the second one, it's good, you know? But dating in the secular world basically stops at this. Because what happens is that, well, I'm attracted, we got along, great, okay, fantastic, what can be better? But you got to think of the higher level. The third level of the soul is called the neshama. The neshama. And that's connected with the mind. And that is a higher part of the soul. It's connected with the mind, and it gives your ability to take your thoughts and to direct your feelings and to direct your actions. This part of the neshama is, in our story, is going to be related to values. Okay, so this is the things that I hold important. And it's the weirdest thing. I mean, especially like you see couples that are intermarried, very often I find a very strange thing. The couple is intermarried because they liked the way each other looked, they got along well. And then what happens is they get married and then they have a kid. And all of a sudden they come along and say, well, are we going to circumcise the kid or baptize the kid? And I've heard that. I'm like, I don't understand. How did you not discuss that before? How did that not come up? So they find some kind of combination. We'll get a priest wearing a yarmulke, some kind of weird combination, how they're going to make this thing work, because they never thought about it. But how'd you never think about it? And this comes up like when birth of a child, death, all the things that people have as important processes in their lives. In the secular dating world, they don't really consider this, and therefore they don't ask the question. But this is the question. You got to ask this question. You got to say, what do you value? Now I want to share with you, and this is the phenomenon of how actual proper spiritual dating is done. Spiritual dating is very, very different in the secular world. And I'm going to explain to you why. Because when you take from the higher part, the soul, the thoughts, the values, the emotion, the physical, when you go in that order, you have a certain amount of direction. But when you go from the bottom up, it becomes very, very confusing, and you totally misuse your understanding and your values. Why is that? So let me explain. It's very, very simple. You ever see a politician when they want to go and they want to sell something? They give you a handshake and two hands and, put their hand around you. Why? Because touch has an extremely powerful experience. The touch, the physical world should be an outgrowth of the spiritual, the emotional, the physical. It should be a continuation of it and an expression of it. When you go out of order and you put the physical in there and this touch and this connection now and feelings, then your mind gets all skewed. And that's why, when I've given classes to different groups, and I once, if I had a large group, I'd say, okay, how many people, raise your hand, how many people have been in a relationship with someone and they knew it was never going to go, it was never going to last? And everyone puts their hands up. So why are you in a relationship for? Because right now, they skipped the levels, they went for this, and they're in that world. That is going to blow up. And then most people, or many, many people, feel that, well, it wasn't worth it, because it ends up blowing up. It becomes a terrible, terrible thing. In Jewish dating, what happens is you go with the mind first. You have to do all three, but you don't go from physical to emotional to mind. People meet each other and they talk. What are your values? What do you want? What is important to you? And they start with the neshama, and then they see, oh, we connect emotionally. And there's also an attraction. So then that infuses from the higher parts to the physical as one expression. That's the way it's supposed to be. Okay, so now we've covered the three, what's called the main parts of the soul. These are called the parts of the soul that we experience. We have some connection with the nefesh, connected with the physical, the ruach connected with the emotional, and the neshama connected with the values and intellect. But there's another part, there's two parts of the soul that are beyond. They're called makifim, surrounders. The next one is called the chaya, life. And it's called the soul of the soul, neshama de neshama. And how does that manifest in our world? It's a little hard to figure this one out because most people will have really very, very little awareness of that in any way, shape, or form. But the way it will manifest in the world is by what is your unique mission? What do you feel is you? I understand it's a little hard to figure out. They don't always know what is me, especially if they get married at a young age. But that is a place where there has to be a connection also. In the deeper part of myself, who am I and what is it that I need to accomplish? What's my mission in this world? Now, here it does not be the same. It has to be complementary. It has to be that you work together towards it. But in the higher level, that is the connection of my soul, my mission, I'm going here, and my soulmate is along with me going in that same direction, even if there's different expressions of it, but we're going in the same direction. It's complementary to each other. That's the fourth level. Now we get to the last level. The last level is what's called yechida, the oneness. And this is where the highest part of the soul is connected to God. It's the oneness. And this is, in our scenario, what the sages mean when they talk about a soulmate. It's because in the higher dimension, the oneness of the soul is one soul. It's a male-female soul. It's one soul that's separated, comes into this world into two parts, which have to find each other. In its root, it's actually one. That's what it means, soulmates. The higher part, the yechida, the oneness, is where it is literally in its source one. I'm going to digress a second to explain this because people, have this question, believe in soulmates, not soulmates, what does it mean? And like all things in the world, people kind of understand it very superficially. So I want to give it a little bit more understanding because people don't really fully get what the soulmate situation means. So let me just elaborate. The Talmud says that 40 days before the formation of the child, a heavenly voice comes out and says, this one will marry this one. Okay? So now that would seem to imply, well, really, soulmates are totally locked in, you can't ever change it. Well, it's not so simple. Because let's say, for example, we have a case of a person who became a very great person. The soulmate potential person should have also been a great person, but they had free will and became an evil person. How can we say that they're stuck with each other right now? They won't want to marry each other. And that really is, a story of a very famous person in history who was the person named Esau, Jacob's brother. He was supposed to actually marry Leah. Okay, there were two boys and two girls from the same family. And ideally, Esau should have married Leah, and Jacob should have married Rachel. But what happened was Esau decided to be such a bad person that his soulmates wouldn't marry him. And that's the famous story. The Talmud says that she would ask, people would say, oh, there's two brothers to Rivka and to Yitzchak, and there's two sisters for Lavan. And the youngest will marry the youngest, oldest will marry the oldest. And she would ask, Leah would say, well, I'm the oldest. What's the deeds of the oldest? The oldest is a bum. Esau, man, he's terrible. The younger one's really great. Yaakov's a big righteous person, but only, and she would cry, and she would cry and cry and cry, and they say, so the person, why are you crying? Like, what? Don't marry him. You're not gonna marry him. The answer was because she did know that he was potentially her soulmate, and since she cried, she had the merit to marry Jacob. The whole story there. So you see that even though there's a potential soulmate, there is the potential that it could change. It has to be. How do you put that together? So the Talmud talks about two types of soulmates, which could actually be more than two, but two types of soulmates. One is the Ziv Api Mazel, the soulmate that was decreed from the very beginning of creation, before you're born. The second one is a soulmate that is based on the actions, what you become. Now, that makes people a little uncomfortable because they're like, wait a minute, I don't want the second one, I want the first one. But we don't really know what it is because we don't understand what souls are. We think of souls as like, a cup of coffee, like this soul, like that soul. It's not true. Souls are not physical entities. As a matter of fact, souls are interconnected in the first place. So for example, the deeper teachings tell us that just like you have a physical body, which has fingers, eyes, nose, and it can together creates one entity, one body. That's the same thing by souls. You're part of a greater soul, which is sometimes why you meet someone, you connect to them very, very deeply. Why? Because maybe you're actually sharing part of a greater soul, or maybe you're both fingers in the soul. You have a similar function, so you have a similar mission for the person. So we don't really know what souls are. We think of them as separate entities. They're not. They're interconnected. So we have to understand when a person gets their second soulmate, it's not someone random. It's somebody that was still part of them on the spiritual level, on the yechida, on the oneness of the soul. They were also one, but in a different parameter. So if all things would have been equal, they would have married the person that was their original stated one. But when things happen, like free will, the story of Esav, so what happens is they end up marrying the person that is still connected to them in the spiritual world, still a soulmate, but it's not the soulmate of the type that if all things being equal, it's the soulmate that came through the reality of what each person became. And you can't say which is better, not better. It's irrelevant because God moves the world. It says for God to soulmates on the first level is a natural mix. It happens easily because they were set up. Soulmates on the second level, it says that God has got to move the whole creation and shift everything around to make them line up, because there's other fallouts that might happen. So he moves the whole thing because these people do share in their root a soul, and now they need to get together and to become one in the whole cosmic picture, however that may be. So that is the highest and lowest level. The highest level is in the root of it, the person that you get under the canopy, under the chuppah with, God willing, you do it right, should always be the person that is the other part of your soul. And then from there, you come down from the oneness, yechida, the oneness of the soul, you come down to, I have a special, unique purpose in life. And the soulmate is part of that. And then I come down to my values. I come down to my emotional. And it expresses all the way into the physical. And it has to, because if it doesn't, then people are not really connected. They can't separate the two. The physical relationship is a holy relationship because it's the whole person, right? A person that has a physical relationship with someone they're attracted to without the other things, it's no different than an animal. It's an animal. Animal, it's an animal. But human being is the whole thing. It's all one. And when a person could unite those things and go from top to bottom, then they make sure that there's a full, strong expression into the oneness they have with their soulmates. Okay, thanks. That's the idea of soulmates. Have a good one.